Hi, my name is Sara. I'm a master's student in the Department of Sustainability Studies, and I would like to tell you a little bit about my research on community-based education. But first, I would like to tell you a couple of stories. The first story is about me. I've always loved being outside, and I credit that to my parents. My parents gave my siblings and I the gift of time when we were little. Unstructured time, free of soccer or piano lessons. We went outside in the morning and came back at night after being hosed off on the back patio. We didn't just play, we created worlds. We made volcanoes in our sandbox and wetlands in our garden. We were adventurers, leaping from our tire swing into our inflatable pool, learning how to navigate risk. I held potato bugs in my hands up close to my face and marveled at them, and my mom sewed leather patches on all of my jeans because I kept wearing through them so much by crawling around in the grass. This gift bestowed in me a deep appreciation and respect for the outdoor world, but more than that, a kinship. I cared about being outside like I cared about spending time with a family member. As I moved through education and into a B.Ed program, I saw how rapidly opportunities for this sort of experience were slipping away. There would be no more people to care about potato bugs in a few generations. The second story is about a young student I encountered while I was completing my B.Ed program. This kid had been all but written off by most. He got in a lot of trouble. He couldn't engage in classroom activities. He had a lot of trouble paying attention and engaging. When I looked at my grade sheet, marked on a scale of 1 to 4, a row of 1s succeeded his name. It was disheartening. One day, I invited an organization called Trent Aboriginal Cultural Knowledge and Science, or TRACS, into the classroom to give a workshop on Shkode, or fire, as part of a grade 7-8 science unit on heat. This student in particular, and all of the students in this class, were nothing short of transfixed with this facilitator. Their eyes gleamed as he described the power and cultural significance and science of Shkode. When we went outside, he lit a bundle of sage for a smudge, and they inched closer and closer to him with their faces upturned. And I got to write a column of 4s down the class list that day. Although I wouldn't quite realize it until now, about 5 years later, I had just seen the power of community-based education and how it can engage all learners, bring Indigenous perspectives into the classroom, and develop those familial bonds with the natural world. That is what my current research focuses on. I wanted to start with stories because stories are important. This is how we make sense of and relate to the world. This is how we encourage children to make sense of and relate to the world. And I think it's important to start with positionality and remind ourselves that there's no such thing as objective research. We're all coming in from our positions. So these stories, as well as my past educational experience, has led me to a field called Environmental and Sustainability Education, or ESE. The term was developed to encompass educational traditions that are similar, like environmental education, climate change education, outdoor learning, eco-justice, education for sustainable development, and so on. This allows educators and researchers to more effectively discuss and collaborate on issues across these disciplines. One of the problems we have within education is the siloizing or compartmentalizing of fields, which makes us feel like they're separate, and then we don't effectively collaborate and innovate. Land-based learning, or Indigenous knowledge, is often grouped in with ESE, but I have made a decision not to do that in my project and to address ESE and IK separately. A lit review has led me to conclude that there is not enough of a critical lens within ESE to incorporate issues of indigeneity or race. Another prominent discipline that falls under the umbrella of ESE is place-based learning, or PBE. PBE was conceptualized as a way to emphasize the importance of the local for educators and to break barriers between the school and the community, which have for a long time operated as separate, even though the school is embedded in the community. This type of education seeks to involve the community in the classroom and vice versa, encourages students to connect with both their natural and built places, and revolves around the idea of living well in place, or making a good home where we are, caring about our surroundings. Although my research aligns with many of the tenets of PBE, I've chosen to describe the organizations that I'm studying as using community-based education, or CBE, again to address the issue of a lack of critical lens. PBE has been criticized for excluding Indigenous knowledge, as of course this is how many First Nations have conceptualized education since the beginning of time, and further has been accused of co-opting some of this knowledge as PBE without providing due credit. PBE also does not require that educators explicitly politicize learning, even though many educators do. But this excludes issues of race and socioeconomic oppression in learning, as well as the lived realities of marginalized students. I think that language matters, even though this seems sometimes tedious or unnecessary to go through all these abbreviations. I think that language like story is important. It frames how people view the world and either centers or disregards non-Western ways of knowing. And it's important to me to be intentional with the use of terminology throughout my project. So the project that I am working on right now is a case study of 2 organizations in the greater Peterborough area that provide education grounded in IK and ESE. One organization is TRACS, as I mentioned in one of my stories. TRACS delivers educational workshops focused on two-eyed seeing, or the weaving together of Indigenous and Western scientific knowledge. Workshops such as the Three Sisters, Turtle, or Fire guide students through a two-eyed science exploration. The second organization is the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship Project. This is a community-based initiative focused on fostering positive early childhood connections with the natural world, as well as helping interested educators, parents, ECEs, and the like to connect with other organizations in Peterborough that offer this kind of education, like Green Up or Camp Kawartha. The Pathway Project uses 30 research-backed landmarks to guide outdoor learning through the ages, and it's more independently completed by educators with assistance through the Pathway framework. There are currently many policy documents issued by the Ontario Ministry of Education telling teachers that they must integrate both ESE and IK into their classrooms. The trouble is, it still doesn't happen across the board. Part of this issue lies in the documents. As I conduct a policy analysis, I've found that although these documents stress that this integration is mandatory, they do little in the way of telling teachers actually how they should be integrating ESE and IK into their classrooms, or providing any concrete examples of how to do this. These documents are also held separately from the curriculum documents that tell teachers what they need to teach in each course at each grade level. This is not only overwhelming due to the sheer volume of paperwork that we're throwing at teachers who have quite a schedule, but it makes ESE and IK seem less central than the requirements that are in the curriculum documents. I'm currently in the process of interviewing staff from TRACS and the Pathway Project, as well as educators who have worked with one or both organizations. I'm not as much interested in proving if ESE is important or leads to improved learning outcomes, because we know it does. I'm interested in learning how directly experiencing ESE and IK education versus being provided with the resources affects students and teachers. As I mentioned, I'm using a case study methodology for this project. I'm conducting semi-structured interviews to maintain some structure and keep us on task, but allow me to follow the natural flow of conversation throughout the interviews. I'm also using policy analysis to examine the ways in which the policy documents issued by the Ministry of Education are structured. I'm not finished the analysis stage yet, but I have begun thematic and in vivo coding, which means I'm coding for both themes and keywords throughout the interview transcripts. I'm following a grounded or inductive analysis, which means that I draw theories out of the data I have instead of applying theories to the data. And I'm doing this to honor and preserve the voices of the project participants, because I really value the experience that they're bringing, and I think that that is where a lot of solution lies. I'm especially interested in whether teachers change their own personal practice after their experience with these organizations. In addition, I'm interested in discovering areas of growth and strength for these 2 organizations. They have different operational models, which is interesting, and I'd like to see which features appeal to educators and have led to the most change. I'm further interested in discovering from both educators and Pathway and TRACS staff if there are any perceived barriers to or support for the implementation of ESE or IK-focused learning in the conventional classroom. Lastly, I'm interested in discovering how educators are finding out about these organizations and what is motivating them to do so, to see if we can use this information to make this a more common occurrence in schools. I hope that the results of my project will allow me to present key factors of community-based educational organizations that make them particularly effective and likely to influence teacher practice or a teacher's own personal philosophy of education. Long-term moving forward, I'm also hoping to show the importance of community involvement in the conventional classroom. There's a lot of literature on whether or not professional development opportunities or resources help teachers to change their pedagogy in terms of involving the community, and so far has not been super successful. And I hope that this will show that the actual experience of partnering with an organization and seeing them with their own class is more effective in influencing teacher practice. I believe that this will be significant for future research in community-based education, as well as in educational and curricular reform, because that's ultimately what is important, is changing it so that more kids get opportunities to do things like this. I would also like to work towards a critical theory of ESE, so that IK and issues of racism and other forms of oppression are an explicit focus within this field. ESE's chief focus is environmental justice right now, which of course is extremely important in the midst of a climate change emergency. But there is no environmental justice without justice for Indigenous people, justice for Black people, and people of color, and the acknowledgement that education is fundamentally a political endeavor, and we can't keep politics out of education. So for future research, I would like to continue researching processes of community-based education with a critical lens. I'm interested in pursuing more research on critical food systems education and community-based food sovereignty movements, as well as community-led education more broadly. I also want to pursue a more participatory methodology in the future and explore possibilities for mentorship or education nested within a research project, such as providing youth participants with instruction on conducting field observations or coding or interviewing if that's something they're interested in. I believe that there's a lot of possibility for progressive education here at the intersection of ESE, CBE, and anti-racism or anti-oppression education. And that's everything. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching.